Anybody else feel like we should have gotten more of these? You know, open world superhero games with original characters and not just licensed bullcrap. With where the culture was going at the time, I thought we would get a wave of these. The MCU and other hero flicks were on the rise. Open world games were becoming the norm, and these two games were successful enough to prove that there was money to be made there. For some reason though, it just never happened. Many open world games went the grounded, realistic route, and the two games I'm talking about today both spawned series that died out pretty quick. It's a damn shame because there was a lot of potential of both of them in this style of game in general. The reason why I want to compare these two is pretty obvious. Not only are they early examples of what I described, but they both came out within the same month, something that both the fans and devs themselves acknowledged. You could kind of think of this video as both a comparison and a double review of sorts. Hopefully shit doesn't get too confusing along the way. Anyway, Infamous. What's up with this electric man, and why is he shocking bitches all over this city? So a massive explosion goes off in the middle of Empire City, and at the center of it awakens a courier named Cole McGrath. Poor bastard was unknowingly delivering a deadly device called the Ray Sphere and was told by a mysterious voice to activate it, which leads to this catastrophe you see here. A large part of the city is obliterated, thousands are dead, and the aftermath leads to societal collapse around the city. Also, a plague strikes, which leads to the government quarantining the entire city, and it only takes a couple of days for gangs to take over. If there's one bright spot to all this, is that Cole eventually awakens from his coma with these new electric powers that he goes on to hone for the next 2 weeks. From here, the game begins proper with Cole and his buddy Zeke trying to escape the city. But shit goes from bad to horrific for our main man Cole here. He's publicly ousted as the guy that caused the explosion, which now has him labeled as a terrorist. His girl Trish resents him now because her sister Amy died in that explosion. And while trying to escape, Cole gets caught and blackmailed by this FBI agent named Moya, who forces him to look for this guy named John along with some other tasks. For the rest of the game, Cole battles the 3 major gang factions throughout the city, gets stronger as a conduit, slowly discovers the plans of the major players, all while playing hero or villain depending on the player's moral choices. We'll get more into all this later. What about Prototype?
That's him!
Prototype sees us playing as Alex Mercer, some dude that awakens in a morgue with some crazy ass biomass powers. He has no clue on who he is or how he even got these powers, and for the whole game, that's pretty much what he's trying to find out. He does this by mostly eating a bunch of motherfuckers and gaining their knowledge. This immediately puts him into conflict with these Black Watch guys, who are this special force branch in the military that seeks to contain him. They're sent to New York to contain the now rapidly spreading Blacklight virus that is essentially turning people into these gory freak monsters. From here, the story devolves into a whole bunch of conspiracy involving these Black Watch dudes, this company named Gentech, this woman named Elizabeth Green, and a whole bunch more.
I thought if I could find out who was running Gentech before Black Watch erased them too, I could find my past.
What did you think that would gain you?
Answers. I wanted to find out what happened to me. The reason. Someone to blame, someone I could punish.
So there's already a lot of similarities with the premise of these games. Both feature average dudes that reluctantly get superpowers out of nowhere. Both present technological conspiracies that slowly get uncovered throughout the course of the game. And both Cole and Alex are essentially the last hope for the crumbling cities. The difference is that in Infamous, Cole as a character knows who he is, and there was a clear before and after event with the blast that changed everything. The game already establishing that the focus is going to be on how the blast affected everyone around the city. With Prototype, there is no big before and after event. Instead, the city is suffering a slow death, with the focus here being on how that even came to be. Alex being an amnesiac that doesn't know anything not only presents an additional mystery on top of that, but it also puts us, the player, in the same shoes as Alex. Everything that he learns, we learn at the same time. Only time where that isn't the case being the very beginning, where the game gives us a taste on how overpowered you'll be later in the game.
Time to end this.
Both games open pretty strong, but I do think that Infamous offers a better hook, and that mostly comes down to how the game presents itself. Cole's monologues are gripping and precise, and they're assisted with these grimy comic strips which still look pretty damn cool. Unfortunately, they're only saved for the most important story beats. Most of the game is moved along through these phone convos, which sounds lazy until you're presented with the in-game cutscenes, and you're just like, yeah, let's get back to the gameplay. God, no wonder they didn't want to zoom in on things too much. This game is ugly, and I'm not just saying that through the lens of 2024. Nah, even at the time, this game looked off. Like, the game is clearly going for a realistic look with the character models, but the animations are so stiff and awkward that it makes everybody look like they're made out of plastic. Something that's especially noticeable in these in-game cutscenes that look unfinished. Like, peep this scene where Kessler's supposed to make his entrance via helicopter. They could even animate him getting out of the helicopter.
You stole my childhood!
Obviously, this isn't the worst of its era or anything, but it's a little weird how unpolished this game is for a first-party Sony title. It's not just the graininess of the characters and city. Nah, this game in general runs pretty poorly. Not expecting a perfect 60 frames or anything, but damn, this game can barely hold 30 a lot of times. It's choppy as shit, even when you're not engaging in combat. I'm generally not a fan of how washed out and gray so many games of this era looked, but Infamous does get a pass here considering that Empire City is supposed to be this lawless, crime-ridden hellhole. In terms of conveying that despair, Infamous does a pretty good job. Trash and broken down cars everywhere, stores boarded up, large swaths of the city without power. Apparently the Warren District is supposed to be the one that's slummy, but it honestly didn't look that much worse than the rest of the city. Prototype is also looking pretty rough these days, but it's looking rough in the usual ways games of this era look rough. Washed out colors, stilted facial animations, and a lower resolution. All things that aren't preferable, but are expected when you go back to this time. Prototype lacks that cool looking comic art that Infamous has, which gives that game some identity, but at least the in-game cutscenes here actually try. There's also these weird, trippy picture sequences that play out whenever you consume somebody. Looks like a damn industrial rock music video from the 90s. Don't really know how to feel about these, to be honest. The most important thing though is that unlike Infamous, this game actually runs properly. Even in the most chaotic moments, this game never dipped in frames for me. Mind you, I did play and record the original 360 version, which is the most stable version. Apparently the PC port runs like complete ass. Unlike Infamous, where Empire City is just a fictionalized version of New York, Prototype's open world is literally just Manhattan, and things here are pretty normal, at least at first. Doesn't take too long for things to become even more hellish than whatever's going on in Empire City. New York here sports the classic skyscrapers everywhere, while Empire City barely has any, and the reason for that plays into how each protagonist moves around the city. As you can see by the footage, Cole isn't sprinting up skyscrapers, which is why in his city, there's barely any. It's kind of tough to say which one of these games is the better presentation because both games aren't exactly all-stars in this category. I could find you 20 other games from 2009 that look better than both of them. If you were to hold a gun to my head though, I'd probably say Prototype edges things out ever so slightly. When Infamous wants to, it can look pretty stylish, especially when you're going off of your lightning powers. However, when it's bad, it's noticeably bad. Prototype is just really bland, doesn't hit the same highs but avoids all the lows, and I think that I value consistency a bit more here.
Oh, just saw this hellacious explosion. What the hell was that? gas station.
What? Just cause you can't drive, man, doesn't mean no one else wants to. We could've used that gas.
Well, like you wouldn't have done the same thing.
Touche, Capitan.
So with all the aesthetics and frivolous stuff out the way, we can finally talk about the thing that matters the most, the goddamn gameplay. Both games here are open world action games that give you a bunch of powers to mess around with. Both have you getting progressively more powerful throughout the game, and both have you doing story missions with specific challenges with side content to pad things out. How both go about these things though feels completely different. With Infamous, Cole's a walking battery. Dude can discharge an infinite amount of lightning bolts, but when it comes to stronger abilities like shock grenades and Hadoukens, you lose energy and have to recharge, typically by draining the power of a nearby electric source. As far as mobility, you're going to get around the city climbing up buildings and jumping over rooftops Assassin's Creed style. And later, you're able to rail grind and glide, which eases things up a bit. The general flow of things is restoring power in the city through these sewer trips and fighting against the various gangs that dominate the city. Reapers, Dustmen, First Son, all of these assholes dominate their respective islands, and you can't go 2 seconds without getting shot at by one of them while running around the city. You would think being a superpowered free runner there'd be easy pickings, but hell nah. This game's a lot more difficult than I remember. It isn't overwhelming or anything, but man, these dudes really lay on the pressure. It's often you against 10 guys that all have pretty good aim, all things considered. Factor in other freaks with superpowers and yeah, shit gets pretty hectic. Fights are often these destructive skirmishes where you'll constantly go in and out of fights scrambling for electricity. Sounds annoying, but that's one of the things that makes the combat pretty fun. The amount of mayhem you're able to inflict is a sight to behold, especially mid to late game when you start getting some real godlike superpowers. You go from a boardless static shock that picks off guys here and there to a parkour Zeus that's able to wipe out entire militias in a few moves. Something that's amplified if you choose to go the evil path where some of your powers have an explosive after effect. It doesn't take too long of blasting goons to notice that Infamous has a pretty unique feel compared to other superhero games, and that's because unlike other superhero games where they go the beat 'em up direction, Infamous is practically a third-person shooter. Think about it, the over-the-shoulder camera, the incentive of getting headshots, shooting with the trigger buttons. I mean, for Christ's sakes, there's even cover in this game. Only reason people don't think of it as a third-person shooter is because Cole doesn't use a gun, but if he did, this game would slot right in with the rest of them. This also gets us to my first gripe with this game, and that's the fact that so much of the combat is dependent on good aiming. And the reason that this sucks is because you're using the PlayStation 3 controller, and trying to get accurate headshots with an analog stick is some shit. Also, it's clear that all the focus was put into the shooting because the melee combat sucks dick. Even upgraded, it's not even worth doing. Feels super stiff and barely does any damage. Doesn't even look cool, and enemies constantly run away anyway, which means it's easier to just pick them off from a distance. Despite all that, I always look forward to the combat in this game. Can't say the same thing about the movement. If you haven't played this game and you've been thinking that the climbing looks awkward, well, you're correct in thinking that because it feels as awkward as it looks. This ain't no Assassin's Creed where you just have to hold the free running button to scale up a wall. Nah, you have to constantly tap X against the wall and hope that Cole grabs onto the ledge you want. Cole magnetically attaching himself to the nearest surface works well when you're just scaling up a wall or hopping from platform to platform. The frustration comes when you have to do more intricate climbs down and around a building. This is where you're really going to be fighting with Cole because this is where this motherfucker starts grabbing onto shit that you don't want him to. Reason why these surveillance missions were the worst side missions in the game. The challenge here is supposed to be finding surveillance devices around a building to destroy them, but the real challenge is just moving Cole around the damn building. You know, I gotta say, the mission variety here is actually pretty vast. Elimination missions, fetch quests, escort missions, tailing missions, protecting missions, and much more. Nothing you haven't seen before if you played any other open world game, but they're spread pretty far from each other to where I didn't really feel the repetition. But besides that, even with these common mission types, there would be some unique factor with most of them to where there wouldn't be too many direct repeats. They were pretty confident about this too because unlike other games where you can see on the map what type of mission it'll be, here you don't know what the heck you're getting into until you talk to the NPCs.
I saw something I shouldn't have, and now the Reapers are gunning for me. Now you gotta help me. You gotta help!
Ah, crap.
Nah, the repetition that I felt was with these collectibles, particularly these blast shards that upgrade your power source. They ain't too annoying to scout for in the beginning as they're literally scattered everywhere, but later the amount that you have to get just to get extra nodes becomes so much that it's not even worth it. For the most part, the side content is pretty good in this game. Only gripe that I have is that you'll always get a measly 100 XP, even though some of these missions are as tough as mainline missions. These karmic missions being the prime suspects.
A lot of food here. Enough to feed the three of us for weeks, maybe longer. Bet if I fry a couple people in the crowd, the rest will run away. The food will be all ours, but some of these guys might starve.
Doesn't take too long for this game to start hounding you with some moral dilemmas, and this is where we get into the karma system. Pretty much the main selling point of this game aside from the cool electric powers. You can either be a hero or an asshole, and this meter right here shows where you're standing with the general public. It's simple really, the more good things you do, the more good boy points you get. The more bad things you do, the more bad boy points you get. Restraining bad guys, healing people, assisting the police, good. Injuring civilians, draining people's life force, and shitting on the police, bad. With many of the story missions, you're frequently presented with a choice where you can either be selfish or selfless, and obviously the selfish choice is the bad one, and the selfless choice is the good one. Meaning that the game is a little bit easier if you choose to be an asshole, especially since it's pretty hard not to kill civilians through collateral damage. These sort of moral binary choice systems are seen as pretty gimmicky now, but I remember back in the day, this was like the thing to put in your game to make it seem like the character's actions were having a tangible effect on the world around them. And for the most part, it works. With Infamous, the more evil you become, the more hostile crowds will react towards you. Your appearance becomes pale and dirty like you're a damn vampire, and certain characters will lambaste your actions. The more good you become, the more crowds will idolize you, cops will help you out in fights, and the more you'll see these heroic wallpapers around the city. Sucker Punch even went through the trouble of changing a handful of dialogue and story moments depending on where your moral alignment is, and seeing how things play out in another playthrough after playing through one is pretty interesting. Doesn't really change how you play the game. You're still going to be shocking bitches from a distance regardless if it's red lightning or blue lightning. However, there are certain side quests locked into certain alignments that play into what you're usually doing in those alignments. With good Cole, it's helping out the police. With evil Cole, it's doing whatever Sasha says and helping out the Reapers. This is where I started to notice the bias a little bit towards good Cole, because his missions have way more variety than bad Cole's. Everything from capturing guys to saving hostages to escorting prisoners. With evil Cole, 9 out of 10 of his missions are just slaughtering people. Not to mention the police are just straight up broken in this game. They have perfect aim, and for whatever reason their guns do way more damage than any of the gang members. These riot guys especially piss me off because they can shoot you down a block away without even aiming. You would think helping out Sasha and the Reapers would lead to her calling these guys off from trying to kill you throughout the game world, but nope, these motherfuckers still want your head despite all you've done. Compare that to Good Cole, where the city is willing to fight for you. And this is even getting into the cutscenes that clearly show Good Cole no matter what. The writing makes a little bit more sense as a good guy too. You'd think being able to make all these moral choices, the game is pushing you to really see things from the perspective of Cole and really weigh out these moral dilemmas, but then you see that all the strongest abilities in the game are locked behind the highest karmic levels, and that idea gets tossed out the window real quick. Not only is there no benefit to being neutral, but most of these choices really aren't that deep. Aside from playing a tiny bit more careful to avoid collateral, you're really not that inconvenienced by being a good guy. The most you'll take is some forced damage here and there that you can quickly heal from. And a lot of these choices aren't really you being a patron saint. Like, I'm pretty sure any decent person would just shoot down this guy here that's been hung. This kind of gets us into the issue of binary moral choice systems to begin with, which is that, well, they're binary. And some of these choices really don't have to be. So check this out, right? There's these missions in this game where there's this toxic black tar that's being pumped inside buildings throughout the city. In order to stop this, you have to disable the machines on top that are pumping them. Apparently, the only two ways you can do this is by shooting it off with lightning bolts, which will cause it to overload, or hitting it with a shockwave point blank to launch it off. The former is the evil choice as you avoid getting splashed with tar, however you're overloading the shit which causes more of this goop to affect the citizens. Shockwaving this shit off is the good choice because you avoid all that and you're sacrificing yourself for it. So, what's the issue here? Why is this choice stupid? It's stupid because you don't need to be point blank for your shockwave to hit the machine. The only reason you have to is because the game arbitrarily decided that you need to take this damage in order for this choice to seem more heroic. Hell, why can't you just shock grenade the shit and destroy it that way? Why does it need to be either bolting it or shockwaving it? Again, this isn't to say that the whole system is bad or anything, it's just that it's very limited in terms of actually making you think about your choices. If the goal was to make the player put themselves in the shoes of Cole and make the sort of decisions that they would make, then it kind of fails. But if the goal was to offer an alternative version of the story with a different way of playing on repeat playthroughs, then I think it exceeds. Feels like it was a missed opportunity to not have more gang wars in this game. All three factions clearly don't like each other and are vying for control of the city. Why not have them slug it out throughout the world sometime? Not only would it reinforce Empire City as this hellhole, but it would just make the world feel more alive. Haven't said anything about the bosses, and that's because there's only 3 of them and they ain't really anything special. Typical video game bosses where you're just waiting for the downtime to get your shots in. They serve as climaxes to their respective regions, and that's about it. So that's really it with Infamous until the story. What about Prototype? Yeah, things are pretty different here. So Alex is a walking biomass man, which means that the dude is not only able to absorb any sort of living organism, but is able to shapeshift his body in all types of ways. Already the freedom that a power like this provides sounds endless, but because we're playing an action game, it mostly amounts to turning into other people or transforming your hands into destructive weapons. Claws, clubs, a big ass sword, fake muscles, and a whip. I made it sound limiting, but it doesn't take too much experimenting to realize how much carnage you inflict on not only enemy soldiers, but civilians and the environment. Pair all this with the strength and agility of the Hulk, and yeah, nobody stepping to you, even in the beginning where you don't even have all this stuff yet. The general flow of things is taking on missions where you usually have to combat both these Black Watch guys or the infected popping up throughout the city. With these Black Watch guys, it's everything from destroying their bases, to sabotaging their equipment, to murdering their leaders. You're public enemy number 1 to these assholes, and they're more than willing to throw all types of shit your way. And this is where these guys actually feel like a threat. You may be able to tank regular gunshots from a couple of guys and then demolish them in one sweep, but try doing that when you got multiple helicopters, tanks, drones, and the infected all honed in on you. All of a sudden you don't feel like such a god and actually have to escape these dudes GTA style. Something that's fun in its own right to do with how great the movement is. Sprinting faster than any vehicle, up walls, hopping over buildings, air dash, gliding. Already the movement in this game is a lot more freeing than in Infamous. It's always a good sign in a game when the sheer act of getting from point A to B is engaging, and yeah, this game definitely has that. The momentum is never lost, and it just looks plain cool. The city's a jungle and you're practically King Kong in this bitch. The only drawback here is that the movement is so turned up and exaggerated that when you're tossed into these close quarter combat sections, shit doesn't feel right. Flying off the handle after a slight tilt of the analog stick works well when you're out in the open and have to dodge missiles. But when you're in an enclosed space against an opponent that you have to get close to, yeah, not so much. It's weird, it's slippery and stiff at the same time. Probably because on top of that, the lock-on system is pretty trash in its own right. It's accurate if there's a big target on screen, but when you go against a group of anything else, it doesn't know what the heck you want. Also, was it just me, or is the dodge janky as hell? You only need to use it against these hunters, and I swear no matter how you time it, you'll always get hit. I'm willing to admit that maybe here I just suck and there's nothing wrong with it. Definitely made the leader hunter fight a bitch. Just like Infamous, I did not remember this game being this difficult at points. Since you're so powerful, less of the missions are about killing guys and are more about some other variable that you either need to get, protect, or escort. Black Watch and the Affected are just there to make your life harder, and yeah, there are definitely some effective roadblocks because missions like Shock and Awe, where you have to destroy these filters inside the toxic gas, had me constantly going in and out of combat. And the reason is because on top of the toxic gas, there's so many damn enemies that you can't power through them all. I like this though, it kind of forces you to mess around with your full power set and see what's going to get you by. The hammer fists are pretty good against vehicles, the sword is great against hunters, and the whip fist is just all around the best shit. Seriously, the reach on this thing is insane and is helpful in damn near every situation. It kind of trivializes bosses, like why go toe to toe with these guys when you could just whittle them down from a distance. There are a number of abilities that aren't that useful, like the full armor and the shield, but I wouldn't want them out the game because fucking around with these powers against civilians is still fun in its own right. Same with the weapons and hijacking vehicles. Regular guns, completely useless. Why they would think we would want to use them when we got superpowers is laughable. The vehicles, on the other hand, are surprisingly strong. This was definitely on purpose because so many of the missions in this game require you to utilize them in order to complete your tasks. I get trying to diversify the combat, but being stuck in a big slow vehicle isn't as badass or interesting as demolishing dudes with your powers. Same with the stealth. Yeah, there's stealth in this game. You're an indestructible virus and this game frequently has you sneaking around for some reason. You can disguise yourself as anybody, but in order to do that, you need to consume them first, and this is where you'll notice how fucking brain dead the AI in this game is. These are some of the stupidest guards I've seen in a game yet. Somehow these dudes aren't suspicious of their comrade jumping 50 feet in the air and running faster than a taxi. And sometimes you can consume somebody right by these guys and they think nothing of it. Stealth consume my ass. I can't be too mad because it's so goofy, but yeah, this shit is not good and felt like a complete afterthought. The side content also leaves a lot to be desired. Only thing to do outside of the main missions is taking out these Hive and Blackwatch bases or doing a whole bunch of these time trials around the map. For the former, I like the fact that the Infected and Blackwatch are constantly at war with each other with their respective strongholds everywhere. Makes the events happening feel a bit more dire than they otherwise would be, something I wanted to see in Infamous. However, once you've taken out one of these bases, you've taken them all, and there's so many of them that I would be shocked if Radical was expecting you to tackle them all. After taking out 3 of these things, I was already feeling the repetition, proceeded to not bother with this shit soon after. And the time trials, not even worth touching unless you really like these sort of challenges to begin with or want to grind for XP, something that's not really needed since this game is really generous with it. But yeah, as far as side content goes, Infamous has this game beat. However, if there's one thing that this game has over it, it's the fact that in Prototype, it's way more fun to just fuck around not doing any missions. Seriously, as a kid, I don't think I ever finished this game, and that's because I was too busy causing mayhem around the city. The powers of Alex are just cooler than Cole's. Like, don't get me wrong, electricity is cool and all, but it has been done many times before. Can't think of too many other characters with these weird virus powers that Alex has, and there's just way more you can do with them. On top of that, you're not penalized from being an asshole like in Infamous. Hell nah, there's no morality system here. It's clear from jump that Alex is an anti-hero. Hell, you can probably argue that he's a villain with all the people he's killed. The tone in general is much more grim, dark, brutal, edgy with all the gore and stuff, but we'll get more into that when we talk about both games' respective stories.
Whoa, that was some shit. Don't get near it.
I mentioned the Hulk earlier, and yeah, that was purposeful because anyone that's played the Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction will immediately feel the similarities. Finding out that Radical made that game made too much sense because that game was practically a prototype to this one. The movement, some of the powers, how missions are designed, a lot of that was brought over from that game. Obviously, with it being a 6th gen game, there were limitations. Prototype expands on many of the things there, which is why Prototype in a way feels like what they wanted to make all along. This isn't to knock that Hulk game though, because that game was a childhood favorite of mine too. That's pretty much all I gotta say about Prototype's gameplay, which brings us to one of the most important questions of this video. Which game has the better gameplay? Infamous or Prototype? Woo! This shit is tough because I had fun with both of these games despite the flaws. Infamous is definitely the more focused game. Everything goes back to your lightning shooting, there's a smoother power progression, smoother difficulty curve, better pacing, and the missions are more creative. Prototype is a more fulfilling sandbox game. The sandbox is bigger, you have more toys to mess around with, and there's a bit more freedom in how you go about missions. Yeah, this is a bit of a cop-out, but I gotta call a tie here, man. Yeah, Infamous is technically the more well-designed game, but I had way more fun fucking around in Prototype, especially in New Game Plus, where you get to keep all your powers for a second run. The feeling of being an all-powerful walking virus is magnified there. Weird that Infamous doesn't offer something similar, but I guess that's what the good and evil playthroughs are for. Sounds like I'm preferring Prototype a bit so far, and yeah, so far it is edging out Infamous ever so slightly, but that's because we haven't gotten into the story and characters yet. Yeah, I'm not even gonna hold y'all. This is where Infamous starts to take lead because I did not give two fucks about what was going on in Prototype. First off, look at this fucking guy. Just pure 2000s edge. You couldn't create a more edgy looking lead if you tried. Fucking Crawling by Linkin Park should be playing every time this dude shows up on screen. But I'm just clowning. That's not really my issue. My issue with Alex as a character is that he's really dull. No personality whatsoever. Makes sense in the beginning with the memory loss and all that. One of the main themes of this game is finding your identity. However, even when this dude discovers his identity and everything that's happening around him, nothing changes. He's the same blank brooding guy all throughout. He's not close to any of the other characters either, so it's hard to give a damn about their well-being. But then again, all the characters in this game are just as one note as he is, so you wouldn't give a damn about them anyway. This game does try to get you to empathize with the possible anguish Alex may be feeling, but the voice acting and writing completely fail at getting you to connect. There is no emotion behind it, and it often sounds like it was the first take.
Hope Idaho was an experiment.
How could you possibly know that?
The people I've killed, they're in me. I can hear them, see the things they've done.
What the fuck are you talking about?
I can understand it all. I'm supposed to do these things. But it's right. I can feel it.
Find Ragland and ask him about McMullen.
Dana gets written out of the story right after Alex saves her. He gets betrayed by his wife, which is just glossed over. And the revelation that he's the cause of the virus spreading throughout New York doesn't get much of a reaction. Also, I get that gameplay is king, but man, some of these cutscenes are just way too short to establish anything. Especially in the beginning, it's all like, hey sis, she barely explains the mission at hand, and then the dude just dips. The lack of character arc or any emotional through line definitely prevented me from getting invested, but this isn't to say that the plot itself is bad. The conspiracy around Hope, Idaho, Gentek, Blackwatch, and how that comes back to Alex surprisingly connects and is pretty interesting once all the information is revealed. The problem is that it's a crawl to get there. Not to mention the full picture is still not shown, as there's a crap load of information hidden within these webs of intrigue that you have to go out of your way to find. Yes, it's more content for the game, but it did no favors to the narrative. Separating shit out like this is the reason why so many people think the plot is either convoluted or confusing. So, that's what I think about Prototype Story. What about Infamous? Well, I've already mentioned that I think the narrative here is stronger, and the reasons are for what Prototype lacked. For one, Cole is a much better character. Dude actually has a personality and an arc that you can connect with. Immediately, it's easier to step in the shoes of Cole and root for him, as he's just some dude trying to get by in a job he hates. When he gets his powers, it's clear that his powers are just as much of a curse as they are a gift. Yeah, he has superpowers now, but his life has been falling apart ever since he got those powers. Everybody in the city hates him, his best friend is envious of him, his girlfriend wants nothing to do with him, and he's blackmailed into serving an FBI agent for no benefit. Yeah, shit sucks for Cole, and depending on how you play him, he either grows into a beacon of hope that shines in the darkness, or regresses into the power-hungry terrorist that everyone views him as. Both paths are written pretty convincingly, and you can easily see Cole falling one way or another depending on the circumstances. The whole message of this game changes too depending on what side you're on. If you choose to be a hero, it's the classic Spider-Man quote, "With great power comes great responsibility." Throughout the game, Good Cole expresses reluctance to help people and take on the role as the city's savior, but throughout the course of the game, that's exactly what he does. He may not want to, but if he doesn't, who will? And just like Spider-Man, his personal life is in shambles because of it. And the good epilogue, it's shown that Empire City has improved because of Cole's efforts. However, Cole himself has never felt more isolated. With Evil Cole, the message is that power corrupts absolutely, and obviously you see this with Evil Cole becoming more demonic the more powerful he becomes. However, power corrupting other characters is pretty apparent too. You see this with Sasha and Alden Tate, who have attained crazy abilities and lead factions, but have lost much of their sanity as a result. You see this in Zeke, who not only betrayed his best friend for the chance of superpowers, but was willing to sacrifice the lives of thousands for it. Honestly, along with Cole, Zeke was a really good character too. He's kind of insufferable and fucks up a lot of shit, but that's the point. He's someone who desperately wants to be useful, which is why he throws himself into situations that are out of his depth. I remember being just as mad as Cole after the betrayal. What he did was pretty egregious and honestly shocking when I first played this way back. It made total sense though. The game did a pretty good job at establishing Zeke's growing insecurities throughout the game. Now Trish, on the other hand, yeah, I don't know what Sucker Punch wanted me to feel in regards to her character. Damn near as insufferable as Zeke, but unlike Zeke, where his unlikability was a character flaw that contributed to the story, Trish being so bitchy throughout distracted from it. You're supposed to care later on when she gets killed by Kessler, but the game doesn't endear you to her at all. Most of the game, she's giving Cole a hard time because her sister was killed in the blast that Cole activated. And initially, I get being taken aback hearing this, as finding out that your boyfriend killed your sister in a terrorist attack is some crazy shit. However, even after Cole explains that he was set up and had no idea what he was doing, she still treats him like a monster, and it's just like, bruh. I get everyone else buying into the propaganda, but surely your longtime girlfriend that lives with you would be more understanding. Cole is a victim too here. It's a fucked up situation for everyone, and her blaming him for everything is pretty unreasonable. Anyway, Trish ran over, but there is another issue regarding her that I have, and that's how her death was handled. Pretty ballsy for Sucker Punch to kill off the main hero's love interest, especially during this time. I gotta give props there. However, the fact that no matter what you choose here results in her death is some bullshit. For those that haven't played this game, the choice here is either saving a bunch of doctors from falling to their death or saving Trish from falling to her death. The former is the good choice, while the latter is somehow an evil choice. The bullshit here is that it doesn't matter what you choose. Trish will die no matter what. Even if you choose the bad option and try to save her, she'll magically be on the other building as a trick. Can't help but feel like this was a big missed opportunity here to really make your karmic standing really matter. Why not go all in and actually have Evil Cole save Trish, with the good option being the only one she dies in? It would truly hammer home good Cole's altruism and make that choice sting even more. It would be a pain in the ass to write two different endings for the rest of the game, but only a fourth of the game is left by this point anyway. They probably wanted to keep things under one canon for the sequel, which is understandable. They really stick the landing with a pretty gripping cliffhanger at the end there. Kessler was one of those great pulling all the strings from behind the scenes villains that I always like to see. His presence was always ominous, and his motivations made total sense when he's revealed to be an old Cole from an apocalyptic future. That plot twist was insane and pretty unexpected. However, it does deal with time travel, and as per usual, it comes with some things that don't make sense. Why go through all the trouble of creating a race fear and molding his previous self to fight the beast when he could just go back in time to the moment the beast shows up and fight him then? It's clearly stated that he could have stopped him then, so why not just team up with his old self and stop the beast then? Also, how the fuck did Kessler get his powers anyway? Did a race fear go off in Empire City in his timeline? How could that have happened when he was the cause of the race fear being invented and going off in the first place? Was there a Kessler in his world? It can't be, or else the events that played out there wouldn't have happened. Kessler's story would have played out exactly like Cole's in this game. It's clear that Kessler didn't just go back in time, but went back in time in a different timeline. That would explain most of the differences in events, but now it just makes Kessler look like an idiot because all of his changes haven't changed anything, at least not in his own timeline. These are questions I've always had since beating this game way back when, and unfortunately the sequel doesn't answer any of them either. In fact, it introduces more questions that go unanswered, but we'll get to that whenever I make a video on that game. Despite these issues though, I still enjoyed the story Sucker Punch was trying to tell here. It ain't masterclass or anything, but I was still pretty invested. One of the reasons why I was a bit more engaged in Infamous's missions over Prototype's. I actually wanted to see how things were going to play out.
But when the time comes, I will be ready.
So, with all that being said, which was the better superhero game? Infamous or Prototype? Well, I already kind of spoiled it earlier, right? I think Infamous is the slightly better game overall. What tips it over, at least for me, is its more polished gameplay and story. Prototype was more fun with all the different powers and freedom it gives you, but it is held back a bit by its jankiness and often uninteresting narrative. That's just me though. If someone said Prototype was better because of its positives, I wouldn't be mad, as both games are in the same tier for me anyway. Anyway, that's all I gotta say about this. If you were somehow entertained by this video or like the sound of my voice for some reason, consider subscribing and doing all the usual stuff to boost this video in the algorithm. I got other gaming deep dives on the channel that you'll hopefully like too. Check those out if you got the time. Peace out, and until next time.